guys, welcome to the fucking Booty Base. In today's video, we are going to be explaining and exploring all the magnificent and marvelous different variations of cable kickbacks and a whole variety of other different variations. Cable kickbacks and kickbacks are an absolutely fan-fucking-tastic exercise to really isolate your glutes, and they're fantastic because we can often progressively overload them, make them heavier, set PBs, and get really strong. But there are a lot of different ways in which you can do them with minor tweaks which can potentially make major impacts into the slight differences in the way that the muscles are going to be recruited. So in today's video, we're going to be going through all of those little minor tweaks, and I just want to let you know that none of these variations we go through today are going to be the best or better. They're just all a little bit different. So I encourage you to explore all of these movements and try them out for yourself to see which ones you like best and which ones work best for your hip anatomy to build your booty. So let's get into the video. Now, ladies and gentlemen, alrighty, I said we have a lot of variations to go through, but the first thing that I need to show you before I can show you all these magnificent variations is what I don't want to see and what I do want to see with pretty much all of the lifts. So, the one thing you really want to be avoiding with your cable kickbacks, like Brittany was demonstrating in perfect basic bitch Becky fashion, is coming through and extending, or rather overextending, and bringing the movement into your lower back. You see, if you start to get this curvature in your lower back and your spine, if you start to flare through the ribs, that's really not what we want to see. So we want to be shifting back from the cable just a little bit, and yes, you can bow forward, but from here, we don't want to be arching our back like this. We actually want to be keeping our rib cage down, okay, and coming into almost a hunchback position. Now, I know that arching your back does make your butt look a little bit better when you kick all the way back and you give it a kickback, and it makes your booty look nice and plump and rump for Instagram. But there's a lot of influencers out there doing that just to get engagement because their glutes look absolutely fantastic and big, but round the back it looks less sexy, but it's going to be getting you a bit more engagement so we can extend up and squeeze into hip extension without compensating and flare those ribs from your Brit, coming in to back extension and feeling that lower back flare up. Now, the next thing that I would like to ideally see you avoid is keeping your toe straight and kicking directly back like this. You see, kickbacks are much better performed in an externally rotated position. So we want to actually flare our toe out to the side, and rather than kicking directly back, we want to be kicking back and slightly out to the side. This runs a lot better with the glute fibers, which come down in this direction, and you'll feel a much better contraction. I actually did an entire video all about this with kickbacks and abductions. I'm going to link that for you right here and in the description below. So if you want to go and get a more detailed look at this, then you can go and do that there. But remember, toe out and kicking slightly out to the side in external rotation when all your kickback variations today. All right. Now, it's time to kick things off with all of the wonderful variations that we have of our cable kickbacks. We're going to kick things off with probably the most common and favorite variation which I see, which is our kickback with a 90-degree hip bend. Now, this variation is a fantastic variation for a lot of reasons. One, we have this 90-degree hip bend, so a lot of the time, anyone who experiences any lower back pain isn't really going to be feeling that as much with that nice, beautiful flat back, and that is fantastic. It also gives you a lot more stability because you can lean forward, you can balance on a pole, and you're in less of an upright position. So this leg doesn't really have to stabilize as much as if you were standing upright. But what we're going to be seeing here is with the tension with the cable, we're actually going to be working against Britt's hip here. Now, ideally, when we're working through our glutes, we're working through hip extension. So Britt's glutes have to contract really, really hard. Now, ideally, Britt would be having a weight that's going directly down this way. So if the cable was here and she was coming straight up and down, that would be ideal because the load vector working straight up and down against her hip and the lever arm being really long away from her hip would be very effective. However, you'll see that with this kickback variation, as Britt comes all the way up, the weight is now kind of taken into her hip in this pattern. Now that's not bad, and the weight is definitely still challenging her at the top, but not really quite as much as it probably is around about here. But this variation is a lot better because it allows you to come forward and get a much bigger stretch on the glute. So we can come all the way through, come in, and we're getting a lot of tension through here, up, 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 kind of start losing it a little bit at the top, still there, but maybe not quite as much. So a fantastic variation, and you might even feel these kickback variations a little bit more in that mid section of the glute, and you really are going to still feel that squeeze. Now also, people can sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable with this, so you can also come onto a box and do them here as well, or a bench, and some people find this much more comfortable. Again, as mentioned, this is a variation which you can get really strong at. So when you do get really strong, the stability can be quite hard and quite challenging. So having a box there to stabilize yourself on will help you to coordinate the movement a lot better and hopefully allow you to be able to move even more weight. Now, in contrast to our 90-degree hip bend, we can come through and perform our cable kickbacks with a little bit more of an upright posture. Now, when I say upright, I definitely don't mean whoosh, all the way upright like this, because if we do them like this, well, there's just very limited range of motion. You're very likely going to crank that lower back, and as you know, we don't want to see that. So, still bowing forward slightly from the hip, but nowhere near as much. Also, when we're kicking back, we're not now going to be kicking all the way up, but rather keeping the range of motion shorter and only coming to around about here. Now, what that's going to be doing is keeping that tension a little bit more in line with Brittany's hip in this horizontal load vector. So yes, we are getting a little bit less range of motion, but we're getting a more consistent tension on the glute when we're in that peak contraction and in that shortened range. So bowing forward will allow you to use more weight and get you a bigger range of motion. However, standing up will shorten the range of motion, give you more tension in that peak contraction. However, you will definitely need to be using a considerable amount less weight. It is also a lot harder to stabilize in this upright position for another reason as to why you are going to be needing to use a little bit less weight. And they're both fantastic and amazing variations. A lot of the time I see the girls down in the booty base always doing this bowed forward variation, and I tell them, look, let's just try and make the weight a little bit lighter and come and stand up here. Just let me know if you can see that change. And almost immediately they say, oh wow, that hits different. And I'm like, yeah, it does. But they're both great and they're both fantastic to use in your programs. And lastly, one more little variation which you can try and play around with is actually coming through and doing a elevated kickback like so. Now, this doesn't change a hell of a lot. However, I have experimented with it with a few of the girls down here, and some of them much prefer coming onto a higher surface with the cable still set at the lowest pin. Now, this is just going to be slightly changing the loading and slightly lengthening where the cable is in relation to your hip. And when we're standing in this upright position, it doesn't change a hell of a lot, but when we lean forward, we kind of can, all the way from your grid, all the way to that 9-degree, we kind of get to make up a little bit for that tension in the way that it kind of drags out of the top, because now as Brittany is higher in relation to that cable, it becomes a little bit more of a horizontal fashion. So again, getting a little bit specific and a little bit technical here, the only reason why I do this is because I encourage you to explore movement and explore your exercises and see which variations that you like best. Well, that's all well and bloody fucking good, but what if you don't have access to cables? Well, that's okay, and our cable kickbacks are at a wrap, but we're going to be going through now and showing you a whole variety of other different kickback variations of which you can try out, which are a little bit more unique and different. Cables are fantastic because they allow you to have a consistent load mostly throughout the whole range of motion, and also it's something you can progressively overload, set goals, and work heavier and heavier and heavier. But if you don't have access to that, well, you can also just use a band and just do it exactly the same setup in exactly the same fashion. However, with a band, you're really only getting any tension on the squeeze like this. And as the band comes all the way back, well, we're not really going to be getting really anything down here at all. And that's okay. It just means that bands are probably better suited to higher rep ranges. And it also means bands are fantastic because we can do them a lot more frequently because we're only really squeezing and pumping up the muscle rather than putting a big stretch on the muscle. Now, moving away from our standing kickback variations, we're going to be coming in for a quadruped kickback, or also known as a donkey kickback. Now, as you can see, Britt is down here on all fours, and sometimes people, when they do kickbacks, they complain about feeling their hamstrings. So what we do with the quadruped kickback like this is we're actually going to be bending the knee, shortening the hamstring and taking it out of the movement. So as we come up and extend the hips, we're actually going to be making sure that this isn't working as much and we're bringing all that power into the glute. Just remember, again, with this one, it is very easy to come into that extension of the lower back. So try to make sure we really keep that nice rigid core, and you can play around with either coming up onto your hands or coming down onto your elbows like this. And a lot of people actually prefer being down on their elbows. Now, this is just the bodyweight variation of this, but we're gonna be exploring a few weird and wacky techniques of different ways in which we perform these down here at the Booty Base with all our machines, bands, and all the rest. Now we are kicking things off with our pendulum donkey or quadruped kickback. Now we do this on the reverse hyper machine by coming down on all fours, kicking and driving the leg all the way back up into full hip extension, squeezing the glutes, but we also get a little bit of quads with this one as well. Now, if you don't have access to that, well, maybe you might have a leg extension that you can actually set up a kickback variation with like we do down here, and this is very, very, very similar, except now we have a cable resistance rather than the pendulum. Now, if you don't want to go down on all fours, then we set up a kickback machine here on the leg extension as well, but this time doing a standing kickback. This is quite similar to a regular cable kickback, but some of the girls prefer the tension on here throughout the lift. Now coming into something that's a little bit more weird and wacky, and we have a leg press machine kickback. When I first tried this, I thought it was going to feel dumb, but it actually feels really, really good, and some of the girls really do quite like it. Again, driving that knee out, turn of the toe out, driving, kicking. You will get a bit of quads on this one as well, but focus on that glute squeeze at the top. Now, if you don't have access to anything, you do have access to your booty buddy, well, you can do some manual resisted kickbacks, and I recommend doing the resistance on the eccentric primarily. Now, you have to actually apply a lot of tension here, and the person who's doing the kicking is actually probably going to be stronger, so make sure you let each other know. And lastly, guys, we have one more kickback variation, which is actually what we call a single leg reverse hyper. Now, this is one of my all-time favorite exercises, really getting a lot of activation in the glutes and also really isolating the glutes. We can do this with a straight leg or we can do it with a bent leg, but I actually usually prefer these with a straight leg just because the lever length of the leg is going to be providing you with more resistance. Now, you will remember earlier on with the cable kickbacks, when Brittany was down in this position and she was in that 9-degree bend, that it was kind of not as advantageous on the squeeze at the top because the cable positioning was pulling from this direction. However, with a reverse hyper, it's completely different. When Brittany comes all the way up top here, she's fighting down against gravity. So now that peak contraction in full hip extension is actually activating really, really, really well. So these are, again, a 90-degree hip bend. However, the loading pattern on the squeeze is quite different. When we come down on the stretch, we really don't get anything too much with this one, but we have a whole variety of ways in which we like to do these at the Booty Base as well. So let's check them out. Kicking things off with our single leg ankle weight reverse hyper. Now, obviously you are going to need ankle weight for this, and they actually are quite hard even if you don't have very heavy weight to use because the weight is so far away from the hip. So keep that leg straight and long and squeeze. Now, if you do have access to an actual reverse hyper machine, then you can actually do this pendulum version. These are epic, but make sure you don't utilize too much momentum from the actual machine here. You want to be able to control the eccentric, get a little bit of momentum at the bottom before coming all the way up and squeezing hard at the top. Now for manual resisted reverse hypers, and these are epic and one of my favorite because not only is Britt getting extra tension from me up the squeeze, but also throughout the entire range of motion, where I can apply a more consistent tension even down when she's in more of a stretch. Now, if you don't have access to any of that fancy equipment, well, you can just set this up on an incline bench, and it is still a fantastic variation. You can either use bands, you can use an ankle weight, or you could do whatever you need to, 1 1/4 reps to make this harder and challenge yourself more as well. Whoa, nice work, Brittany. Thanks for squeezing your butt so much.
No wowies.
No wowies at all. So there you have it, ladies, a whole variety of different kickback variations which can challenge you in different ways, and again, as mentioned, none of them are better, none of them are worse, they're all just a little bit different. So explore your movement, explore your exercises, and enjoy the squeeze, enjoy the burn, enjoy the pump, and enjoy putting the junk in the trunk. And it's time for you to do more than just watch, because if you've made it this goddamn far in the video, I think you know what time it is. I need you to go and like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and ladies and gentlemen, Brittany Buck, you know what they say, YouTube, subscribe on YouTube.